Welcome to the Art of Growth and our panel season on Enneagram stances and attachment styles. This is the Type 6 panel. Before we get started, if you'd like to process the Enneagram and your growth journey with others on the path, consider joining the Art of Growth community. This is the best place to meet up with other Art of Growth listeners as we support each other in our becoming. You can join today at www.theartofgrowth.org. Theartofgrowth.org is also the place to take a free Enneagram test, a free Enneagram Instincts variant test, or to reach out to us for individual coaching or organizational coaching and consulting. There you can reach out to Joel Hubbard or me, Jim Zartman. In this podcast series, we build on the work we've done in other panel seasons on Enneagram type and instincts. All right, here we go.
All right, well, welcome to the Type 6 panel. We're doing this whole focus this season on your attachment styles and your stances. And the fascinating thing about the two is that they're both answering a fundamental question that all humans share. And that is, how do I get my needs met within the context of my relationships? And so what I'd like us to do is, before we launch into that, is have you introduce yourself, tell us your name and where you're from.
My name is Claire, and I live in Northern Virginia.
I'm Linda, and I'm in Northeastern Ohio.
I'm Matt, and I'm in Wichita, Kansas.
And I'm Anne, and I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Okay, well, welcome to each of you. And I'm excited to get into this and see what we learn. Just as a reminder on the stances, we're looking at sort of three types or three approaches to getting our needs met. One is the at, the other one is toward, and the third one is away. And then in the attachment styles, we're looking at secure, and then the anxious preoccupied, which are those who get their needs met primarily in relationship, like you're going to meet my need because I can't meet mine. And then the dismissives are those who actually don't trust anybody to meet their needs. They're going to meet their own needs. And then the disorganized types, which is the fourth category, the ones that don't really have a straight strategy to getting their needs met. So what I'd like us to do is just to begin at least with the stances. And if you would start there and let me know what your dominant stance is, and maybe the stacking. Also, maybe share your instincts as well, because that can be helpful in understanding maybe what's happening there.
So I guess my stance is generally toward, and the sort of stacking, I guess, is toward and then away. And then when all else fails, at. And also in terms of instinct, I am a very strong social instinct, and then also pretty strong after that self-pres, and then sort of the neglected is the sexual.
So can you explain a little bit about what that looks like for you to go toward, and then what does it take for you to go away, and what does it really then take to go at?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I actually go at very often. I only go at in really high stress situations where the relationship is not one that I can just walk away from. And my primary instinct, I would say, in being toward is it's often a little bit of testing the waters a lot of times. So if I'm making friends, I think about this primarily in terms of making female friends, actually. You know, I might say, hey, I like your shoes, right? and that's sort of a bit of toward energy when I'm entering into new friendships. And then depending on what I get back, I will go toward more, or I will simply withdraw. And so in that situation, there's never really any particular reason to get to the at. But if I'm in a work relationship, for example, you know, I have a leadership role where I'm sort of in the middle of the hierarchy. So depending on whether I'm doing toward in an upward way or toward in, for lack of a better term, a downward way, I might get to the at. If my toward energy isn't successful and then my away energy isn't successful, and there's something that's really, really important, I might get to at. And I guess just one more thing I'll point out is with my spouse, with my husband, we can get to at in some pretty explosive ways if my toward energy hasn't been reciprocated.
I love how you said that, the reciprocated piece, because I think that helps a lot of folks out there understand the toward and how that works. It is looking for that reciprocal kind of, I've done my part, you do your part, and it's sort of like that movement to it. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about if my toward is not reciprocated? Like, what do you mean? What are you looking for? What does that look like?
Well, in each of those situations I laid out, and that's pretty much the way I think about them, friendships, primarily friendships with women, my working relationships, which are both with men and with women, and then my relationship with my partner. And I guess with my kids, that maybe even I could talk about something a little bit different. But my husband is, I would say, not primarily, for example, a person with toward energy primarily. He tends to be more away. If he's in his head and I move toward him in some way, if I initiate a conversation with him and he doesn't respond in the way that I'm hoping he'll respond, then in the purest sense, I don't know if this really is a way, because it's in a way that says, okay, fine. You aren't paying attention to me. I'm going to withdraw, and then hope that he notices that I've withdrawn. And it's not always that way. It's very different with, again, my girlfriends or in my work relationships. But if he doesn't respond in the way that I'm hoping he'll respond, then I can get to with him very quickly.
That's really helpful. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm pretty similar. My strongest is away, and then towards or at, and I am a 1-to-1 or sexual 6, as we say. So I think you use the phrase kind of testing the waters, Anne, if I heard that right. And I really liked that, because I definitely relate to that in moving towards someone, whether it's romantically, I'm not married, or in like new friendships, kind of testing the water, moving towards them to get to know them as I'm becoming healthier. But my instinct is definitely to kind of stay away, be more independent. I have kind of a cynical lack of trust in people generally. And I think my comes out kind of in my safest relationships. And a lot of those are my relationships that have a lot of longevity. The friends or the relationships that I've had, my family even, for years and or decades.
Okay, so a few questions. One is, what's you said your instinct, your dominant instinct, sexual. What's the second for you?
Social.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because what we've been tracking with has been how the sexual with the 6 followed by the social tends to have a little bit more of that use of charm as opposed to maybe aggression. So would that be consistent for you?
Yes, I would say so. Absolutely. I've never had that language or heard that language, but yes, that tracks.
Okay.
Is the toward charm?
Yeah, I think on some level, I think there can also kind of be a negative connotation around charm. But when I think about it in, a work standpoint, or just even relationally, yeah, there's some charm in that I can hold conversations pretty easily. I'm good at my work. I generally can kind of get stuff done and do it well. And so in that sense, yeah, I think charm comes out that way.
And that may not be the best word, but it speaks to more of a social skill.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree with that.
Fluidity. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that's great. That's helpful. How does the order of your stances go? You said away. Is that your first, or is toward your first?
I would say naturally away is my first. I will say, I think I've gotten better at towards being a bit more natural for me as I've kind of worked the Enneagram and attachment theory too, and done some of this, but away is definitely my dominant one.
Okay. Talk to me about how that works for you. So that's a similar question to, what we asked. And because it's curious, because there's a bit of an anomaly, and I love anomalies because I think that speaks to the ever evolving kind of people that we are. And so there's how does the withdrawn help you in getting your needs met? And what does that look like in relationship with people?
I think on the surface, I say it helps me get my needs met, or I would have said it helps me get my needs met because it feels safe and it feels protective. And when I kind of look at my story, I needed to feel safe. And especially as a 1-to-1 6, I'm very concerned with emotional safety and with those preserving those relationships. So moving away from that actually feels safe. But I think the irony of that, I've come to learn, it actually doesn't really help me. It doesn't actually really get me what I want. It does at times, but I think that's why I've kind of grown to start moving a bit towards, because I've seen some of the repercussions in my life where I'm like, hey, this away is not really helping me all the time, right? It helped me at one point and it's not helping me as much anymore.
So are you moving away, or are you pausing to evaluate whether you can go toward?
That's probably a better way to put it. I like that language, that kind of evaluation. Again, like Anne said, kind of testing the waters.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because the 6 tends to go toward, or it's looking for the opportunity to go toward, which is why I asked that, is the pause to see if you can go toward, right? It's like that check-in, because also the sexual energy tends to have a little bit more of that. I'm going to move in. And so I was wondering, I was like, well, what is the withdrawing? Because when we use the term withdrawing in this context, we're like, all right, you're already in relationship, you're close. And then maybe you're trying to relate to this person. You know, for a 9s, they talked very consistently about something comes up that's maybe tension, and they want to withdraw in order to like regain themselves so they can return and come back. Mm-hmm. So in like an intimate relationship, do you feel like your first thing when something comes up, your first response is to go away?
Yes.
Okay. Talk about that a little bit.
So yeah, if I feel any sort of threat, however kind of big or small or serious, my first response is going to be to retreat. I want to kind of regain my composure. I want to figure out what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. As a 6, I often don't know, like right in the moment, what I'm thinking. And so I'll kind of retreat, compose my thoughts, figure out where my head's at. Sometimes wait for the person, and this just varies depending on kind of the strength of the relationship. Sometimes I'll wait for them to kind of come back to me, but yes, I will move away, kind of assume the worst, but I'll want to kind of regain my composure before moving back towards.
Yeah, it's quite a bit different for the 6 than it is, say, for the 2. So in the triad that we've called the toward stance, and that other teachers speak of this as the dependent stance.
Beautiful.
We use the dutiful word much more because it tends to fit the 1 and the 2 and the 6. So it's more of what I hear in the 6 is there is a little bit of that dutifulness and sort of like, you know, in the relationship, in the context of the relationship itself. And so that's going to come across different than, say, for a 2 who is always moving towards. And so for you as a 6, you also value your autonomy. You don't want to be trapped in a relationship or feel like you have to be beholding to people all the time. And so there's a need for that. And so there's that away stance definitely plays a factor in how the 6 kind of protects that. Yeah.
I think the difference possibly is for the toward stance, dependent, whatever you want, dutiful stance, whatever you want to call it, is it's still others referenced. At least for me, it is. My response typically is toward, but Claire was talking about how her initial response is to retreat or move away, evaluate, and then decide, okay, am I going forward or not? That's still a very dutiful, others referenced. You're looking outside, okay, whatever the situation is, then you make the decision. Some are going to move towards, some are going to move away. Maybe you try away and then move towards, but it's so based on others. And I think that's what's unique about this triad, the 1, 2, and 6s is it is, because I can see context is everything, right? So depending on the relationship, depending on what's at stake, if it's an argument over where we're going to dinner, there's not a lot at stake at that. If it's an argument at work over a project or a deadline or a client, there could be a ton at stake. But context is everything, but it's going to, at least for me as a 6, when I read the situation, it's so nuanced. It's really hard for me to just pinpoint and say, okay, here's the matrix of the 9 ways I'm going to respond, and you can follow the logic tree. But typically, I would move towards there's a safety thing you're evaluating as a 6, and a security thing. How secure am I? If it's a situation that I'm pretty insecure about, I don't know a lot about, I'm probably going to move away, at least temporarily, till I can collect some thoughts and then re-engage. One of the things that people have mentioned is almost like a testing. And I love that thought of check in even with established relationships. As a 6, I find it very easy to create narratives, usually not completely based on facts, usually based on a small little fact that may have nothing to do with what I turned it into. And I'll feel like, okay, this relationship may be under stress, or there may be a rift here and so then I create this rift. And so then I will move towards and kind of check in. And so that reciprocal, what I'm looking for with that is, how do they respond? What's their body language? Are they engaging? Oh, they did engage me, but they still look upset. They must be upset about something else. I'm trying to figure out in that exchange, how secure and safe is this relationship unit that I'm worried about?
Okay, so what tells you that? Because that's a very interesting observation. Like I'm tracking so much with you there, and I'm thinking that's fascinating. How there's sort of like is the person meeting me halfway? Is there some kind of response? Is that what you're looking for? Like, how are you evaluating? Is that person safe? Is it like, are we good kind of thing in the relationship? And also, I forgot to ask you, what's your dominant instinct and second instinct?
I think totally social, and I would say followed by one-on-one. Self-pres seems to be the first to go off the rails when things get stressed and under time crunch. I think the question is exactly what you said. Are we good? I mean, at the end of the day, whether it's a work-related thing, are we good? Am I going to have a job tomorrow?
Yeah.
Whether it's with my spouse, are we good? Are we going to, and it's always worst case, right? Are we good? Are we having trouble? Is this going to blow up into something even further? With kids, it tends to go from toward to at. But I think that's probably true for a lot of people if they don't start at. I think that's a different dynamic. But again, it's that checking in. Are we good? Is whatever this relationship means to me, is it in health, unhealth? And then, if it's unhealthy, I could choose to retreat if I don't know what to do. If I perceive what the issue is and it's, from my perspective, an easy fix, then I would be more inclined to move towards and inquire more.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
I would say my stances tend to mirror Anne's in that my dominant is toward, and I would say then away, and then my repressed would be at. I think for me, it's the toward feels like it comes from a place of going with the flow quite often. I'm a middle child. So I think, it's was part of my environment growing up to sort of blend and to read the room and sort of just go with the flow and make things very easy for others. So I think that for me, that toward is often going with the flow. And then for me, the at would feel like if I'm almost sort of backed into a corner and really have to have an uncomfortable conversation with someone, I get to that point. And I think, as I was thinking about all of this too, I kept thinking I really often just want to feel someone is with me, standing kind of next to me, instead of that sometimes someone's at energy feels too much and I find myself pulling back. And I think sometimes just it's that desire then to have someone else be with me. And maybe that is mirroring then that like going with the flow. It's for someone else to actually meet me where I'm at, which maybe it's not even truly where I'm at if I'm going with the flow. I think it's often my own needs are the last thing that I'm thinking of. And so that's a muscle that I've been working on trying to build. In terms of my instincts, I am self-pres first. And then I was pretty evenly split between social and sexual, a little more social, but they were pretty close percentage-wise.
For the 6s that I've encountered, coached, had long conversations with, there seems to be a proximity of distance with other people that feels like that's the sweet spot. So if someone's too far away, whether in their emotions that are just kind of withdrawing and pulling back, that creates anxiety in the relationship for the 6. Mm-hmm. If they're too toward, it creates anxiety. So it's like a temperature sensitivity to the relational dynamics. I'm getting some head nods. Does that make sense to you? And is that?
Yes, that really resonates for me. I think, similar to what Matt was saying, there is sometimes if I don't hear from someone, I might start going into my head and thinking like, did I do something wrong? My first instinct then usually is to think, did I do something wrong? Is there something wrong? Instead of just reaching out. So instead of like taking a more at stance and reaching out and saying, hey, how's it going? I think for me, that is more of that going to that away space and getting into my head and then looking at it from every possible angle. Did I do something wrong? What could this possibly be? And I think that for me, especially in friendships, more several years ago at this point, but for me, like retreating was always my first move. And I agree with Claire that I feel like that was really often needing to try and gather my thoughts and figure out my feelings because I'm usually still processing. And so in the moment, if I need to try to say something, my head is it's still processing and trying to kind of catch up with what I'm feeling.
Did I hear you right? You said, it felt like at energy to you to reach out to someone else and be like, how's it going? Or reach out. That feels like at energy to you? That doesn't feel like toward?
Yeah, I did say that feels like I said it though, in the context of feeling like if I haven't heard from someone, and there are sort of the people that I'm in touch with pretty regularly. And so if more time goes by, then to me, I start feeling like, is something off? Is something not right? And that feels more like at energy to me. But I see your point that it would generally just be toward. But for me, it feels like it takes an extra step in that context. Huh. I think I have grown in that area and I'm getting better at sort of being the one that just proactively reaches out and says, hey, how's it going? And then to me, that would feel more like toward.
Linda, I actually agree with you on that. And I think it feels, I see the discrepancy, Jim, in your question, but I think it feels like at when maybe it's actually towards, because I think about my experiences. And if I'm going to someone like, hey, are we okay? Is everything good? Did I, that it feels like the potential for everything to fall apart, right? It feels like head nods. It feels like the potential for them to come back and say like, hey, no, we're not okay. And then we've got a much bigger problem we've got to deal with, or them to not be able to meet me in the midst of that question emotionally and kind of hold that space for me or meet me there.
Which would threaten a sense of rejection for you?
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Or to judge you as more needy, to be more needy than you should be as well.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's wrong with you? Like, why didn't right. Why are you asking me that? Right. What's
why
wrong
do you care
with
so much?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I would like to build on that too. I was jotting down some notes, Matt, when you were talking about the narratives, and you feel like the narratives that you create, I think the words you used are oftentimes not based on anything that's factual. Is that the way you said it?
Most of the context of the narratives would not be actual factual. There may be a fact in the narrative that kind of got the snowball rolling. Mm-hmm. But I sometimes will take that and start reading meaning into that's not there.
So I definitely create narratives. And I would say my narratives are sometimes based on actual fact. Sometimes, and perhaps more often, they're based on my past experiences. Mm-hmm. So I'm reading anything. And this is why I'm building this on the, if I reach out to a friend and say, hey, why didn't you call? Or, whatever, internally, that might feel like an at that will get me a, whoa, she's too dependent on this friendship. And I'm reading that through past experience. And frankly, to be perfectly honest, I think another layer for me is I'm an English teacher. I think that literature also has a huge impact on the narratives that I create about my own life. Whether that's, like if this set of things happen, well, here's what's going to happen next, right? So, and I also think that, at least for me as a 6, as a social 6 especially, I'm scanning everything all the time to put together in my mind, all right, what is the worst case scenario here? What is the worst case scenario? Because if I know the worst case scenario, then I can possibly take steps to prevent the worst case scenario from coming into be. So those are all the narratives going on with my inner committee all the time. Was this going to be like Wuthering Heights? Or is this going to be like, when I was 6 and this kid didn't come to my birthday party that I thought, like that's just all going on in there all the time. So those things all shape the narratives, shape the stories that I'm telling myself.
I think the past events, chaining, I think I've heard it called, where you link past experiences together and you overlay that on what's before you.
Yeah.
And it really changes the reality of what you think, at least you're perceiving at that point in time.
Yeah. The human brain already does that naturally, but I can see what you're saying about with the 6ness and the anticipation of, what could actually be the situation here. If someone hasn't returned my call, if someone gave me a certain look, if I'm being called into the office, and all kinds of things like that are playing themselves out.
And that's where I think the Enneagram has been very helpful in some occurrences where it helps, because there are some friends, like I have a close friend that's a 5. I know he doesn't say much, when I'm going through something hard, but then I hear about it later. Like, man, that was so tough. I can't believe you went through that. And so if I didn't know as a 5, they're kind of withdrawing and processing to know even how they feel to be able to do that. I would take that personal. Like, well, you don't even care? No, this is how they deal with it. And you can go through all the numbers that way. But I think that's what's beautiful about the Enneagram is it, for 6, if you can remember those things as you're engaging people, and not that I know everybody I engage as types, but you can kind of get a sense that, hey, maybe it isn't that they're mad at me. Maybe this is just how they are. Go figure, right?
Yeah, this is excellent, because this is kind of guiding us into a little bit on the attachment styles, and then into how do we grow? How do we get through some of this stuff to, being in more real time in the relationship with people? And so let's take a look at attachment styles and just go through that as to what's your starting attachment style. Again, do not feel embarrassed or ashamed or anything. We've had other podcasters say, yeah, I'm in the disorganized, man. I have no strategy. I'm all over the place. So at any given point, we can be in any one of those, but we're all trying to aim towards the secure attached style. So who would like to get us started with that?
I took that test and it said I was secure, and that's just wrong.
Okay.
I mean, and I went back and I kind of looked over the questions. Now, I'm 56 years old. I've kind of been at relationships for a long time at this point and working on myself for a long time. But I feel like a lot of those questions were asking very specific questions about how you relate to your partner. And I think that if you look at my marriage, if you look at my 28-year-long marriage, on balance, I would look like a pretty secure, attached person. But you've already heard me talk about what I'm like with my female friendships, what I'm like in work relationships. In some sense, I would argue even with my children at this point, because they're all grown-ups now. And so I'm learning new ways of being in relationship with them. So I would definitely say that I am an anxious attacher.
Okay.
How does that show up?
Well, even with the story that I told at the beginning, which is sort of like my testing of the waters in relationships, and a general assumption that, I guess, 2 assumptions, one of which I don't generally even think about. The first one that I do think about often is I don't generally assume that people want to be in relationship with me or that people will like me. I have to somehow earn their liking me. And I think, so that's the first thing. The second thing is also, I don't have choices in terms of who I'm in relationship with. I have to take whoever's willing to be in relationship with me. So, and that's a thing that I don't consciously think about a lot. But once I'm in a relationship sometimes. And I think this is characteristic of sixes, actually, that I sometimes will stay in a relationship long past the time when I should have looked at it and been like, whew, this person is really toxic. I need to get out of this this friendship, or this workplace where I am. I might need to start looking for another job, because I don't go into the world assuming that I have choices. I have at this point in my life, and this has not always been true, a fairly large number of female friends. And again, there've been times when this has not been true. And I asked my husband one time, I actually said to him, why do these people like me? I don't even know why they like me. Right? And, his first response was, you demand very little.
Mm.
You demand very little in your friendships. You're very easy to be with. You demand very little. And so I think that's how that shows up.
Mm. It's interesting because you demand very little, but the anxious preoccupied for you is that you're kind of dependent a little bit more on the others and how they. Okay, yeah. So that's an interesting nuance of that.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much. It doesn't seem so much as like you're needy and you're coming across needy, and people, feel the obligation to have to meet your needs, because that's not how you come across.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could seem dismissive, because it's like, I'm not asking for my needs to be met here. I'm resourceful. I can meet my own needs.
I'm interested in meeting yours. That's usually the way I appear in female friendships. I'm a very good listener. I'll support you when you're down. Linda, I see you nodding your head, right? That what that's like, right? And there are female friends in my life who I love so dearly. And then there are other friends where I don't entirely know why I'm here, but I'm fun and I listen and I give to that other person. And I'm afraid to let that relationship go, because I kind of don't even know how I got the relationship in the first place, right? That question of like, why do these people like me? And I'm afraid of, if I let it go, then I'm going to wake up one day and I'm actually not going to have any relationships. So I have to hang on to the ones that I've got, if that makes sense, even if it's not a two-way relationship, really, even if it's very one-sided.
Very insightful.
I took the quiz as well.
Okay.
And I came out as ambivalent anxious was my highest. And then disorganized came in right after that. Like they were just 1 point apart. And then secure, and then avoidant and dismissive, which surprised me, because I would have thought I was somewhere anxious, ambivalent, avoidant. I think I've thought of myself often again as pulling back, having a tendency to sort of take a back seat. But once I read more than after taking the quiz and went, oh yeah, ambivalent, anxious, and the disorganized, that idea of even just, I can want something, but I'm not going to get it, really resonated with me. That it almost this concept of like, that's not for me, that certain things are meant for other people, and this is just not something that is meant for me. And I think that has really affected me in relationships over the years. And I was nodding my head a lot, thinking about just, like a middle school and high school student, my female friends were always like, you're such a good listener. You're such a good listener, and I, on the one hand, I think I enjoyed that sort of praise at the time, but I also remember often having the thought of like, but who listens to me? And so not necessarily learning that it's okay, that a friendship is a two-way street, and that it's not necessarily always a balanced, reciprocal relationship, that sometimes one person takes a little more and then sometimes somebody else takes a little more. And it doesn't always have to be even or equal. So yeah, I think also just even the concept of having lower self-esteem then was something I remember several years ago, a good friend kind of said to me, I just wondered if you've been struggling with esteem issues. And I sort of went, to myself, like, really? Me? And then the more that I sat with that discomfort, it was like, oh yeah, no, again, when I pull back and look at it, it was like, I was my lowest priority, and everybody else's needs were coming ahead of mine. So I really had to learn that it's okay for me to take up space in relationships and friendships, and to meet my own needs. So
yeah, That is, again, very insightful. I'm learning quite a bit here when it comes to the attachment styles and how that plays itself out. Fascinating. Okay, before I say anything, I want to hear from the others as well. Like, did both of you, Matt, did you take the test as well, or?
I did, and I came out secure, so I passed. No, I'm just
Hey, you get the gold star.
I was kind of like Ann. I was like, that's a bunch of BS. And then I got to thinking, well, I probably am more secure than I realize because of a lot of work. And two, I started wondering if there's a nuance with how I actually do engage and then how I internally feel about that engagement. And I'm like, I feel whether it's a secure style that I'm engaging with someone, it still may inside feel like it's completely anxious and ambivalent and that kind of stuff. So I did come out with secure on, but almost tied for second and third was avoidant and ambivalent, which depending on the circumstance, I can see why those would be close together.
Yeah.
What do you resonate with more? So that's what the external test said. But as far as you, do you see yourself showing up more in that avoidant or ambivalent in a moment of stress or in a moment of where things don't feel like they're going very well? Do you see one of those arising more in you?
I would say probably the anxious ambivalent, and then that did score a couple points higher. I think anxiousness is something that I'm aware of, obviously, but I think as sixes and maybe even in the head triad, as we 5, 6, and 7s all struggle with anxiousness. Every number is anxious. I think sixes especially take it to a whole new level of excellence in their anxiousness. And so I just feel like anxiousness is always there. It may be not right in my face, but it's always kind of that motor in the back of my mind that's revved up. A lot of it's subconscious. So I think that's kind of my go-to instinct. And depending what the situation is, I can see where it'd be avoidant or dismissive, especially at work. Depending on what the situation is, I can see that come up as well. But I would say anxious is probably my go-to.
I'm a bit of an anomaly here, I guess, because I am avoidant attachment. And that definitely rings true in my life. And especially as we were talking about away towards or at, again, my tendency is to move away. So when I feel some sort of threat in my relationships, I tend to retreat, test the waters, gather my thoughts, and kind of see what happens. And there's nuances to that, of course. My friendships that I've had, again, the friendships that I've had for, multiple years, or even I've got friends from childhood at this point. Matt, I loved what you said about you might appear more secure, even if internally you're kind of freaking out, because I absolutely relate to that with my relationships that have some longevity, or there is that trust that's been built or a sense of security there, I might be able to approach them with what looks like security. And I'm able to kind of walk into hard conversations or ask harder questions. But internally, I'm sort of, again, bracing for they're going to walk away from me, or this is going to go terribly, or they're not going to understand what I'm saying. So yeah, I definitely see the avoidant in my relationships works a little bit different. I don't see it come out quite as much, but that's me.
Well, again, super insightful. I so appreciate this, the level of honesty that we have here today. Can we talk about how do we move towards growth? What are some steps maybe you've taken? Even if it's just awareness, even if it's not an actual step, just like I'm having like these ahas, I'm having these connections happen for me, or maybe some steps that you've taken. How are you moving towards the secure attachment in the attachment styles and what we're calling moving towards the ability to use all three stances, but more from a discerned place as opposed to reactive. Like, I choose to act this way. This is the best thing for me. This is the best thing for the relationship, which we're calling the fourth stance, the with stance. So talk about maybe a little bit about how you're growing.
I loved hearing, I think maybe Claire, Linda, Matt, I think at one point or another, you might have all talked about the away energy as being a time to gather your thoughts. And that's my growth point. I think that throughout my life, I have tended to use away energy in a weaponized kind of fashion. And that rarely gets me what I want. And I think, Joel, I can't remember how you just put this about trying to use all of the energies. And I think that there are times in my life where I've used that away energy to take stock, to maybe decide that a relationship is no longer working for me and to move away from it. But those times are fewer than I would like. And I think that that's a place where I'm trying to move towards some growth. And I think that lines up well with being a 6 who really needs to rely more on her inner wisdom. I think that if I can use that away energy to tap into my inner wisdom, then there's the potential for more growth for me.
I love that you said that, Anne, because I know I kind of said at the beginning, I think Joel, you had asked the question, but my moving away, I've learned actually doesn't help me all that much. And it had become pretty detrimental in a lot of my relationships. But Anne, I love what you said about how you're right. We all kind of talked about moving away and the ways that that can be helpful. Being able to see it through that lens of, okay, there are times that moving away can serve me and does serve me. It's just helpful. It's a good spin to put on it and to be able to see that way. So I really love that you pointed that out. And I think for myself, I'm just also learning how to be okay with sitting in discomfort, and that my stances and my attachment style bring a lot of discomfort or anxiety, as we like to talk about as 6s. And some of that's okay in relationships, and it's okay to kind of ride that out and lean into it a little bit. It's not something that I have to run from, but sitting in it actually can create a more of a depth in my relationships and ultimately what I'm looking for. I don't have to fear that anxiety so much, but listen to, again, kind of the wisdom of what it's telling me.
Do you feel like when you're doing that, you're able to access a little bit more of the heart center as well?
Yes, absolutely.
I find that to be true for a lot of head types. Like if it's, the withdrawn stance really helps us. It's like pulling back and then really processing more at the heart level. What is happening? Yeah.
And what do I need in response to it, and some of that?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great follow-up question. What do I need? Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, I think often for me that it's even how do I feel and what do I need? So again, that link of like what's happening emotionally, but usually I need some time for my head to catch up to maybe what my heart is feeling, or for the two to communicate with each other, I guess.
Yeah. There's like a calibration that needs to happen. It's like the heart is active, even if we're not aware of it, but it makes us spin. And so there's a whole lot of thinking that's generated by the unaware emotion. Yeah. So that slowing down maybe helps you to kind of get the feeling. I like the order in which you put that, the feeling, and then what do I need? Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think, I've learned how much then being in my body and getting out of my head can help me process things as well. And so, spending time on the yoga mat helps me a lot. And just that connection of breath and kind of getting out of my head has really been just a huge change for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's anytime your 3 centers get out of balance, which is pretty much how we all live all the time. But being heavy in the head, you talk about yoga. I don't do a lot of yoga, but I do try to hit the gym. And especially if I'm mulling something over relationally, something that's heavy, where it almost your mind gets on replay and you're like, yeah, I've seen this come around before. We've thought this thought. We've felt these sensations about 50 times now. One of the best ways to get it to stop for me is doing some sort of either hands-on activity. That can be as easy as going out and cleaning the garage, or exercise, or just something that gets work done that brings your attention elsewhere is very helpful for me. And I think just awareness, you asked, what are you doing? I think the more we can become aware and catch ourselves, and to do it with grace and not with gotcha. See, you're never going to overcome this type thing. But just with compassion, be able to say, oh, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what caused me to respond that way. It's hard to do. It's hard to do real time. Oftentimes I'm not able to do it real time. Oftentimes it comes later, like, man, why did I respond that way? But you learn every time you do that, you kind of learn about different patterns about yourself. And eventually, I found over the years, you get a little bit better at catching it a little bit sooner. And every once in a great while, you hit it out of the park and you catch yourself sliding down into that space before you do anything that doesn't make sense. So,
yeah. Wow. So good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am deeply grateful to each of you for being on this podcast, for sharing as openly and honestly as you do. Sixes tend to be that way anyways. I mean, I find them to be more honest than I am. So I appreciate that. You keep my feet to the fire. And I love your courage. I've said this about sixes before. I think there's some of the most courageous types in the Enneagram, because even though other types don't have the fears, well, if you don't have the fears, you don't have courage. You don't need courage, right? So, like, the amount that you deal with requires a whole lot of courage. So I admire that. And I appreciate your insights and the wisdom that you've learned, that you've shared with us. So again, to each of you, thank you so very much for having been on this podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode. You can follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter at theartofgrowth.org. You can also go there to sign up for the community or to reach out to us for coaching. But hey, since you're here, why not stick around for another episode? Grace and growth, my friends.